Creativity for me in this process of discourse became a way to take something personal and turn it into something that can explain a higher or a bigger human idea. The idea I chose is freedom, or more precisely, the desire to attain freedom. Because I do not think freedom exists in a complete form or a perfect form, and I believe that it can never fully be achieved. For me, freedom is an ideal, one of the most valuable things for an individual to possess, but also something impossible to fully attain because human beings are always limited. A person is limited by fear, by responsibility, by physical reality, maybe dependence on others, systems of power, and sometimes even internal contradictions. Because of that, complete freedom does not exist. What exists is the constant human desire to achieve it, and to think that desire shapes thought and personal identity. This is why I connect freedom first to the individual, not the abstract systems. Political independence matters historically, but freedom itself begins deeper inside human ability to think independently, to make a choice, to resist pressure, and to somehow preserve inner autonomy even when external circumstances try to restrict it. To explain why this became so important to me, need to bring some historical context because Georgian history constantly shows how political independence can be lost while the desire for freedom still manages to survive. For me, this story begins in 1801, in 1800s, when annexation of Kingdom of Kartkacheti placed Georgia under the control of Russian Empire. From that moment, Georgia lost political independence, but cultural identity still survived. In 1918, Democratic Republic of Georgia was established. It was a short but important period because it proved that political independence was somehow possible. But in 1921, that ended when Red Army invasion of Georgia brought Soviet occupation. So Soviet system did not only remove political independence, it also tried to reshape individuals through collectivism, the idea of collectivism. Personal initiative became suspicious, independent thought was heavily monitored, and religion was restricted, and fear became part of normal life. People learned to speak carefully because wrong words could literally end and destroy their futures. A lot of my understanding comes from family stories, how my grandparents and parents described Soviet life as a world where silence was often safer than being honest and honesty. My father told me that when he traveled abroad as a rugby player for the Georgian national team, Soviet agents constantly watched and monitored and spied the athletes so nobody would escape or speak too freely about the negativities and negative events that took place inside Soviet Georgia. Even outside Soviet territory, people remained controlled. Well, creativity itself became dangerous because systems based on ideological control and fear of different ideas, the fear of creativity that is born within an individual. Uh, a strong example for this is a writer, Paulo Yashvili. He was one of the major Georgian poets of 20th century. Under Soviet pressure, when writers were forced to publicly condemn their colleagues and submit completely to ideological control, he reached a point where he could no longer accept and take that humiliation. In 1937, inside the writer's house in Tbilisi, he shot himself. For me, that story matters because it shows that sometimes even creativity itself becomes impossible under systems that try to control thought itself. Other Georgian intellectual figures also mattered because they protected inner independence long before Soviet rule. Ilya Chavchavadze defended language, identity, and education as foundations of dignity. Akaki Tsereteli, also another prominent writer, gave emotional strength to national thought through literature and through other various creative forms of expression, while Jakob Gogebashvili shaped generations through education. What connects them is that they resisted intellectual dependence. For modern Georgian memory, one of the strongest dates is April 9th, the tragedy of April 9th. 1989, peaceful demonstrators gathered in front of Parliament of Georgia, demanding change and independence. Soviet troops attacked them. There were tanks that trampled people, and some very young girls sadly fell beneath the Russian boot. It was a huge tragedy for Georgians, and the grief still remains strong today. And for me, April 9 matters because it shows individuals standing in front of a force while knowing the danger that's about to come. It proves that people sometimes defend ideals even when they know complete freedom may never fully exist. In 1991, Georgia regained its political independence after the collapse of Soviet Union. But independence did not immediately bring stability and happiness. In 1993, Sukhumi fell, and Georgia lost control over the region called Abkhazia. This is deeply personal for me because my mother's family is from Sukhumi. My great grandfather was a doctor there, and when the city fell, he was killed by Russian soldiers. Even after explaining who he was, for me, it changed nothing. My mother lost her home, became a refugee, had to leave everything behind. I grew up hearing stories about how people crossed mountains carrying children and elderly relatives with almost nothing. Those stories made loss and injustice feel very strong and concrete, even before I personally saw any form of this protest. In 2008, Russia Georgian war again showed how fragile political independence remains. Russian military presence deepened, and country again experienced how easily force changes reality. Today, young people still protest against corruption, political pressure, unfair decisions made by the government, and unfinished democratic development. Police brutality became part of that reality too. Water cannons, gas, physical force, arrests, surveillance, you name it. What also stayed with me strongly is how older generations react to protests. I often heard warnings that the government records faces, takes pictures, remembers people who stand there, and that may use that later against you. Even wearing a mask during a protest can lead to heavy fines and maybe sometimes even imprisonment. The fear shows how older systems leave habits inside people long after formal system change. My own understanding changed most when I attended protests in Tbilisi. I was there for standing there many hours, and first everything felt controlled, almost distant. But when it became dark, police brought a fire truck and started using water against the protesters. Then came and followed very quickly, and the atmosphere changed immediately. What I remember most clearly is how police moved in rows, each officer holding shoulders of the one in front, almost like a chain. They moved through the crowd towards the fire truck, then suddenly turned and started beating people in front of the rows. And the moment everything became chaotic, the tear gas was everywhere, water was everywhere, and people started running in every direction. What stayed strongest in me was anger. I felt injustice physically, not historically or intellectually or through my relatives, but directly. It was a very direct feeling. And history had already taught me the idea of freedom and the emotional meaning of injustice, but the protest made everything feel real. That experience made me understand that freedom matters because if complete freedom cannot exist, the desire for it remains the strongest protection of human dignity. For me, that is why freedom became more valuable than comfort, safety, and sometimes even life itself. Thank you.